I wanted to make a short video as a follow-up to my X-Men Fancast video because more than any other comment, I got comments like this. Magneto not looking old while being a survivor of the Holocaust could be explained away by his magnetism interacting with the iron in his blood, somehow slowing his aging to a crawl. And the Ancient One launching Magneto into the future or sealing him in a timeless prison could work. And in the case of Magneto's age, just say that he ages slower because he's a mutant. And one idea I had about Magneto is that during the Holocaust, Hydra got their hands on him and often put him on ice, even using him as a weapon. So there are a lot of opinions out there on what the Marvel Cinematic Universe should do with Magneto. And I think this is an interesting question for the reasons I bring up in the video, which I'll go over now. If you just watched the video and you don't need the reintroduction, go to this time here. Basically, Max Eisenhardt was a Jewish prisoner of a concentration camp during the Holocaust. Max survived and went on to become Magneto, the mutant master of magnetism. His mission to protect mutants from humanity by any means necessary comes directly from his experiences as a Holocaust survivor. His motto might as well be never again. He sees the signs. Mutants are a persecuted minority, and before you know it, it's tattoos in camps, just ask Bishop. But Marvel has a problem. When Magneto was introduced in the comics, we were a mere couple of decades from World War II. Magneto was a man in his late 30s, early 40s maybe? And granted, at this point, the main X-Men were children, many still around the age of a high school student, so he was still considerably older than them. As the X-Men got older, so did Magneto. And after a bit, they all seemed to stop aging. The X-Men would remain in their late 20s, early 30s, and Magneto would remain in his late 40s, early 50s for most of the rest of their comic history. And the comics never really bothered to explain it away. That's sort of just how this whole thing works. Usually, if you need to look back at an origin, you make a few tweaks, it's not really a problem. Very few comic characters are a product of a specific historical environment. What is stopping Spider-Man from getting bitten by a spider in 2015? Nothing. Totally plausible. What is stopping Tony Stark from getting captured as a result of America's involvement in the next global conflict? Nothing. It's totally possible. That keeps happening, so why wouldn't that be 10 years when they reboot Iron Man just fighting that war? It works. But that is not the case with Magneto. He is a product of the Holocaust, which happened in the late 1930s. So either the Holocaust origin needs to change, or something about the timeline needs to change. And as far as I'm concerned, the origin is not worth changing. Magneto was the product of Jewish creators, and his history was expanded upon by a Jewish writer. It is clearly personal and feels like a betrayal of the writers to erase the Holocaust from Magneto's history. You're welcome to disagree with me, but that's how I feel about it. So if that's the judgment, let's work forward from there. He needs to remain a product of the 1930s and 40s. How then can Magneto exist in the present day? If he's the villain in an X-Men movie set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in like 2030, is he going to be in his hundreds? Because that seems weird. Unless they cast a 100-year-old actor like Mel Brooks. Actually, that's a great idea. Mel Brooks should play Magneto. But on the off chance that Mel Brooks is busy, I have another option to deal with Magneto's age. Actually, a couple of options that I want to outline in this video for how we solve what I'm calling the Magneto problem. Solution 1, make it part of his powers. This one is the simplest. Magneto's mutant power gives him the ability to control magnetism. He can move objects with his mind if they're magnetic, but also he can move himself with the magnetism by riding magnetic waves, which, hey, sure, it's cooler if he flies, so let's pretend any of that makes sense. So why not just make the magnetism and its effect on his body slow down his aging? That's about as plausible as any of the rest of this. If people buy into power bands, a big scam, I could see them believing that all Magneto's magnetism makes him the peak physical specimen and he just like stays young. In the same vein, some mutants have multiple mutations as a result of either great stress or exposure to experimentation, or even the mutant gene therapy known as Mother Vine. Characters like Emma Frost, Iceman, Elixir, and even Blob have gotten a mutant ability that is not necessarily related to their original mutant ability. You guys want to hear Blob's secondary mutation? You do. In X-Men Blue, Blob was experimented on by Miss Sinister and gained the ability to melt into a puddle like Alex Mack, and he just dropped through a sewer grate and disappeared. So why not have Magneto's secondary mutation just be slowed aging, or even a light healing factor? It could be the result of stress brought on by his childhood, or some other event later in life. It could even have something to do with Nazi experimentation. Maybe Magneto is captured as a child and his genes are messed around with in an attempt to use the X gene to create an army of super soldiers, and then he gets slowed aging. Why not? It's easy enough to explain. And now we are getting to the fun part of this video, the interesting idea. What does this change add to to the character? Well, if Magneto's secondary mutation is the result of either the extreme stress of the Holocaust or experimentation, then the Nazis are unintentionally creating their greatest enemy, an ageless Jewish superhuman who wants revenge and cannot be stopped. So it's sort of poetic. Solution 2, freeze him. Okay, not a huge fan of this one, but I do feel the need to include it. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we all know Captain America was frozen in the Arctic for 70 years. So something like that could work for Magneto. Maybe he's imprisoned in suspended animation, perhaps at the hands of Hydra or something like that, and he wakes up as a 20-ish-year-old man in the 1990s. Gives him enough time to establish himself, meet other evil mutants, meet the Professor, and see the plight of the modern mutant. It could work. What does this add to the character? Well, since it builds off Captain America, Magneto would be a dark reflection of the Captain. Not a hero of World War II, but a victim. And like Cap, he would be a man out of time, but unlike Cap, he would have a clear mission and purpose. So that comparison could be, I don't know, something. Solution 3, magic nonsense. Now we're getting to the ones I actually like. We have 3 kinds of magic currently in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's not even counting the magic of things like the Infinity Stones or the magic of whatever's going on in Shang-Chi. And no, I'm not talking about the 20 whatever the hell sick new Acura or Audi or whatever it is. I mean all of this stuff. Like, not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, mostly nitpicking. Does this dragon prove the existence of a soul? Just that, like, they exist? It's like a little glowy circle that the flying tentacles can pull out of your body and eat? And then do you not go to heaven? Or is it like Overwatch before they changed Reaper? Also, does Reaper prove the existence of a soul in the Overwatch verse? And what's Mercy's deal? Is she a vampire? Junkrat is just asking questions, okay? I tried to figure out who's the most likely Overwatch character to be like a flat earther, and I think it's Junkrat. There's definitely some weird literature going on in his flat. My point is, there are a lot of kinds of magic in the Marvel universe already, so it would be easy to repurpose some of that to keep Magneto young. Let's go over the 3 kinds in order of which ones are best. First off, you have gods. Hela, Loki, they are the least good. They use their powers mostly to produce knives and make illusions, but technically they are magic, so on to the list they go. Then you've got your sorcerers, Stephen Strange, Wong, Baron Mordo, etc. We even have a precedent for one of the sorcerers, the Ancient One, living forever based on her connection to the Dark Dimension. But we don't even need that. I don't see why Magneto could not just find a sorcerer and get them to cast a rejuvenation spell on him, maybe in exchange for something like an artifact, like Hitler's gun, which was once used in the comics to shoot Doctor Strange because that somehow made it a magic gun. But then you've got the 3rd kind of Marvel magic user, witches. This is where it gets interesting. I could totally see a world where Magneto at some point met Agatha Harkness and she gave him some of her youth. Maybe he saves her from a villain and she does it as a thank you. Or maybe she can see the future and knows Magneto needs to do something important. Or maybe she's just having fun. Who knows? Doesn't matter. And then there's Wanda herself. We'll get into her convoluted origin in a second, but hey, if at the end of Multiverse of Madness, Wanda is still kicking, it is totally conceivable that she could use her magic to make Magneto younger. Maybe, but then we have a 3rd witch. Like I said, in the comics, Magneto is kind of the father, sometimes maybe, of Wanda and Pietro, except he might not be anymore, probably. So here's the best explanation I can come up with of what the deal with that is. Originally, Wanda and Pietro thought their parents were a Romani couple named Django and Maria Maximoff. They also thought they were mutants. Then Magneto convinced them that he was their father for some reason. And then a lot of other stuff happened, which would probably prove that they were mutants. Like, they must have had their mutant powers shut off in ways that only mutants could. But hey, let's forget about that, because in 2015, we learned that not only was Magneto not their father, they also were not mutants. In the comics, it was explained that the High Evolutionary experimented on that. It also just so happens that in 2015, Marvel Studios released Avengers Age of Ultron, which introduced the twins, not as mutants, but actually just as experiments. What a coincidence! But then, in the Scarlet Witch comic series, which I really enjoyed, Wanda discovers that Django and Maria Maximoff also are not her parents, but her aunt and uncle. Their mother is a woman named Natalia Maximoff, who was the previous Scarlet Witch. It's apparently a title passed down through their family. I don't believe it is clear currently who their actual father is, so it could very well actually be Magneto, for a while, until they change their minds again. All of this goes to say, in the comics, Wanda's mother was a powerful witch named Natalia Maximoff, and her father father, for a while, seemed to be Magneto. I could see the MCU mushing those two stories together and creating a scenario where Wanda and Pietro's mother and father were actually the aunt and uncle, the ones we saw in the flashbacks, and their real mother was the Scarlet Witch who had an affair with Magneto. And perhaps as part of the story in the 80s when they're born, Natalia casts a spell that would keep Magneto around his current age, 50, so he could protect the children if anything happened to her. That works. Now what does this change? Well, now Magneto is younger because he feels the need to protect his family. That feels like an extension of his original purpose as the protector of all mutant kind, but also introduces some personal stakes into the equation. He fights for mutant kind because of the past persecution of his family at the hands of the Nazis and the potential future persecution of his children at the hands of the humans. Do I think he needs this motivation? Not really, but it could create interesting conflicts, especially after the events of Multiverse of Madness, where Wanda is portrayed as a villain. Solution 4, time travel. Honestly, not a huge fan of this one. I lied when I said these were the ones I liked 5 minutes ago. Gotta keep you on your toes. However, this is a pretty simple way to do things, especially since we have so many time travel methods in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, sure, the Time Stone is destroyed, but maybe something happened before it was destroyed, and a sorcerer used the Time Stone to wind Magneto back like Strange did with that apple. Or maybe quantum something, or TVA. Honestly, I don't think those two are worth it, but they do exist, I guess. You know, the reason time travel doesn't really work for me is it feels a little too sci-fi for Magneto. I buy magic because it's personal, but like a scene where Magneto tumbles through the quantum tunnel feels a little too silly. But it does give us a good reason why Magneto existed in the 40s and then hasn't done anything since then. No freedom fighting, no mutant revolutions, none of that. And maybe his abrupt entrance into the timeline is what gets these movies moving. He says now is the time to act, and he couldn't have done that before. I don't know, again, not my favorite, but I needed to mention it. But let's talk about the good one. Solution 5, a mutant did it. Wait a second, you already said this one. All those marker fumes broke your brain. Oh no, humble audience member. You see, the first one was Magneto developing a secondary mutation. This is something different. I think Magneto should make some friends. There are plenty of mutants in the comics who could hypothetically reverse the effects of aging, and Magneto could no. Maybe he frees them from imprisonment and they repay him by restoring him to his peak physical form. Or maybe they just join up with Magneto after seeing what he's doing for mutant kind. Here are my candidates. Number 1, Elixir. Joshua Foley is a mutant with the ability to manipulate the bioorganic structure of any living organism, including his own. He also has golden skin, which, cool. Elixir could absolutely reverse the effects of Magneto's aging, basically restore Magneto to 30-year-old levels. The ideal man, the levels of a 30-year-old. He could take on the world. Elixir isn't incredibly consequential, at least outside of what's going on in Krakoa right now, so I could absolutely see a world where he has been working with Magneto between like the 50s and now to keep Magneto young, and it doesn't upend any plans for future movies. Number 2, could use Tempest or Tempo. Similar mutant powers here, take a guess. Both have the ability to manipulate time. Tempest seems to be the stronger of the two. She can accelerate time, create bubbles where time stands still, and even time travel. Tempo can slow time and mess around with it in similar ways. So if you tweak the powers a little bit for the movie, either of those characters could conceivably wind the clock back on older Magneto. Number 3, Proteus or Legion. Kevin and David. And honestly, this applies to quite a few mutants. Franklin Richards, Jamie Braddock, Nate Gray, Hyperstorm. You guys remember Hyperstorm, right? Send me pictures at Nando V Movies of you holding your Hyperstorm action figures. Any one of those mutants could warp reality and give Magneto a new lease on life. Yes, there are some like Proteus whose powers tend to only affect things he's concentrating on, but they could change that rule if they really wanted to. Magneto could, as an old man, encounter one of these mutants, and the mutant could warp reality, reverting Magneto to his 30s. Again, the peak of physical human perfection. It could even be like a punishment. An old Magneto, ready to die, can be found by a multiverse-hopping Legion who says Magneto is not done yet and makes him young again. And Magneto would feel a sense of duty to mutant kind, so he would begrudgingly continue his crusade. This would also be a fun time for a Legion cameo, because that show rules. Number 4. Listen, I don't want to pretend I completely understand Zorn. According to Wolverine, not even Zorn understands Zorn. But basically, Zorn, with an X, was introduced in Grant Morrison's run as a friendly mutant who became a new teacher at the Institute. He had a big metal head, but then it was revealed that Zorn was Magneto all along. The head was just a helmet. It was all a big ruse. Then it was revealed that no, that actually wasn't Magneto. It was Zorn pretending to be Magneto. And Zorn has a brother named Shen Zorn, or Zorn with a Z. So there are two Zorns and a Magneto. It's a mess. But I really like Zorn here. First of all, he has all the powers you need. He's got magnetism, reality warping, and healing. He's everything we need to justify de-aging Magneto. But also, in the comics, Zorn is introduced as a Chinese prisoner. So I love the idea that somewhere down the line, maybe in the 60s, Magneto rescued Zorn from a similar situation to his own, and the two became close friends. The proto-Charles and Magneto friendship. And Zorn keeps Magneto young as the two fight for mutant equality. But then eventually, Zorn is killed, so Magneto keeps aging naturally from that point on, and that death could further radicalize Magneto since Zorn is incredibly peaceful. The important part here, and the reason I found this avenue the most interesting, is that if other mutants are involved in keeping Magneto young, it would not mean that Magneto is still around because of magic or experiments or mutant physiology or time travel. Magneto is still alive because other mutants want him to be, need him to be. They believe Magneto is a valuable part of the effort to protect mutant kind from those who wish them harm. That's pretty cool. So sure, if you believe Magneto's origin needs to be changed because the Holocaust is no longer relevant or interesting, that's up to you. But if you believe Magneto should not be a Holocaust survivor simply because he is too old, those are 5 ways I think it could work. As always, thank you to patrons, thank you to Nebula subscribers who watch my videos on Nebula, that's awesome. Thank you to everyone who listens to my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, and everybody who follows me on Twitter. That's all I got. Stay safe. I'll see you soon.